In the heart of West Africa, where the Sahel meets the savannah, a quiet storm brews. But this storm brings no thunder, no rain. It brings rebirth. It brings resistance. It brings revolution. This is the story of Burkina Faso, a land that for generations was cast into the shadows, called poor, labeled unstable, written off by the world's elite. For too long, the name Burkina Faso conjured images of famine, of conflict, of despair. But that image was a lie, a carefully curated illusion maintained by the same powers that profit when Africa is silent, but Africa is not silent. Not anymore. Because in the red earth of Burkina Faso, a new drum is beating, not the drum of war, but of awakening. A drum that echoes through fields and cities, through valleys and villages. It says, "We are not your colony. We are not your charity case. We are not your experiment." And at the center of that drumbeat stands one man, not in a golden palace, not behind layers of armed guards, but in the dust, with the people. Captain Ibrahim Traoré. When Traoré took power in 2025, the Western world gasped. News outlets labeled it a coup. Analysts scrambled to predict disaster. Politicians in Paris and Brussels raised their brows and whispered the same tired lines. Democracy is at risk. Africa is destabilizing. Foreign investment may suffer. But in the villages of Burkina Faso, where roads crumble and schools had become ghost houses, the people were not afraid. They were relieved. They did not see a coup. They saw a return of dignity, a return of direction, a return of ownership. For years, Burkina Faso had been gripped by chaos, armed groups, many fueled by the spillover from Libya's collapse. Others born from desperation wreaked havoc across the countryside. Markets were bombed, schools were torched, villagers were abducted in the night. The so-called war on terror brought nothing but terror, and where were the politicians? In foreign hotels, in air-conditioned conference rooms, signing deals that would never reach the people, smiling for cameras while their own citizens bled. Then came Traoré, a young military officer. Just 34 years old, no Swiss bank accounts, no Western degrees, just steel in his spine and fire in his words, and the people listened. Because for the first time in years, someone spoke to them, not at them. Traoré didn't promise miracles. He promised struggle, he promised sacrifice, but most of all, he promised truth. He walked the dusty roads barefoot. He ate from clay bowls with farmers. He sat with grieving mothers and orphan children. He said, "We will no longer beg, we will no longer borrow, we will build." The first target of change was not some flashy mega project. It was corruption, the cancer that had rotted Burkina Faso's core for decades. Traoré slashed his own salary, cut bloated government budgets, grounded lavish official convoys. Dozens of luxury cars were auctioned. That money, redirected to build schools, clinics, water wells. He purged officials with foreign loyalties, fired ministers who resisted transparency. And when a military general was caught siphoning funds meant for counterterrorism, he was arrested. No ceremony, no delay. This was not politics. This was purification. And the people noticed. In the northern regions of Suman, where terror once ruled, something extraordinary began to happen. Farmers who had once fled their homes began returning. Community defense brigades, armed not just with weapons but with plows, formed under local leadership. Young men and women, once recruited by extremists, were now planting millet, maize, and cotton. They called it Operation Rebirth. Under Traoré's orders, unused military trucks were converted into mobile agricultural units. Engineers designed solar-powered irrigation systems using local parts. Community land previously held by elites was redistributed to landless youth, and then came the tractors. They didn't arrive from Europe. They were not foreign donations. They were built in Burkina Faso, assembled in modest but growing factories. Near Bobo Dioulasso, red steel monsters with the Burkina flag etched onto their engines, women in hijabs and head wraps welded frames, men trained in workshops instead of war zones. In less than 18 months, the nation tripled its domestic agricultural machinery. A farmer named Awa from Yaga province stood beside her newly planted field and said, "We used to pray for rain. Now, we pray for peace and President Traore has brought us both. But this was not only a farming revolution. It was a philosophical one. Traore introduced the concept of sovereign production. A simple but radical idea, Burkina Faso would no longer export raw resources for cents and buy them back for dollars. Cotton would be spun into fabric in country. Gold would be refined by Burkina technicians. Peanuts turned into oil. Shea butter bottled and branded for African markets, small. Industrial zones were established. Not just in cities, but in remote towns long ignored by national budgets. This was a decentralization of opportunity, a democratization of development. And perhaps, most powerfully, it was happening without the IMF, without USAID, without World Bank consultants flying in to write 800-page reports. Education, too, became sacred. In a land where nearly half of young girls had never stepped inside a classroom. Traore declared a nationwide literacy surge. But instead of copying foreign models, he turned to tradition. Elders were employed as community mentors. Classes were taught in local languages. Village squares became nighttime learning centers powered by solar lanterns funded by government. Solar Bonds, a girl named Fatimata, once a child laborer, now writes poems about African unity. A boy named Idrissa, who lost both parents to violence, now builds science kits from scrap parts. One teacher in Kédougou said, "This is not just education, this is resurrection." In the capital, Ouagadougou, the skyline is changing. No more concrete ruins of unfinished contracts. No more foreign-owned shopping malls selling overpriced imports. Instead, hospitals rise, built with local labor, stocked with locally trained nurses. Roads once cratered now stretch toward new industrial hubs. And at night, the darkness that once engulfed neighborhoods is pierced by solar light. Water flows in places where women once walked. 10 kilometers with buckets? This is not a dream. It is happening, and still, the world hesitates to believe, because the Western order thrives on African failure, on dependency, on debt. What happens when a country says no? Burkina Faso's transformation is not just a local miracle, it is a geopolitical tremor. For every field that blooms, every tractor that roars, every child that learns to read, an empire somewhere begins to shiver. Because if Burkina Faso can rise without begging, what excuse do others have? And so the resistance begins. Not from within but from outside, from the quiet corridors of global finance, from editorial rooms in Europe, from policy summits cloaked in concern for stability. Their fear isn't that Traore is a failure, it's that he is a success, because nothing threatens a global system built on African weakness more than an African country standing on its own feet. Soon after Traore's rise, Western media began its assault. They called him a populist, a military strongman, a dangerous example. The same headlines that once praised puppet presidents for signing trade deals now scorned Burkina Faso for choosing independence. Economic reports warned of instability. Ambassadors issued thinly veiled threats. Aid agencies quietly began scaling down operations. Not because Burkina Faso had failed to meet goals, but because it had set its own. When Traore expelled certain foreign NGOs accused of political interference, the world screamed dictatorship. But the people on the ground knew better. These were not neutral charities, they were institutions with strings attached. Instruments of influence dressed as generosity. "We are not against help," Traore said in a speech to students at the University of Ouagadougou. "But help must not become a leash. If your aid controls our decisions, it is not aid, it is domination." France, the former colonial ruler, found itself ejected. Its military bases, once sprawled across Burkina Faso like scars of conquest, were closed, its troops sent packing, its influence rejected. And with that, Traore struck at the heart of neocolonialism. He didn't just remove boots on the ground, he removed the idea that Africa must host its oppressor to be protected. The CFA franc, the colonial-era currency tied to the French treasury, was next. Traore joined leaders from Mali and Niger in calling for a sovereign West African currency. Not one approved by European bankers, but one built on African labor, minerals, and markets. He asked, "Why must we sell our gold, then borrow euros?" Why must we export our dignity to import survival? But it wasn't just currency he sought to reclaim. It was culture across Burkina Faso. A renaissance of identity was underway. Traditional festivals, once sidelined by Western-style schooling, returned to public squares. Griot oral historians were invited into classrooms. Folk musicians now perform alongside classical ensembles. In national events, young Burkina artists paint murals of revolution and hope across city walls. For the first time in modern memory, children are learning not only mathematics and science, but the stories of their ancestors. They are being taught that Africa was not born in chains, that their story did not begin with slavery, but with kingdoms, inventions, and civilizations that shaped the world. Traore made it clear, if you do not know where you came from, you will never know where you are going. But reclaiming culture doesn't mean rejecting modernity. In fact, technology has become a cornerstone of Traore's national revival. A new initiative called Digital Faso has created local tech hubs in every major region. High school graduates now train in basic coding, solar engineering, and cybersecurity. Satellite internet connections, funded by regional partnerships, are bringing online education to rural towns. Startups are emerging from the most unexpected places. A team of 3 university students recently developed a water purification device using discarded plastic and clay. Their design is now used in over 300 villages, reducing waterborne diseases by 40%. Mobile banking services run by local cooperatives, not foreign corporations, are empowering farmers and vendors to manage finances, take microloans, and store earnings securely. This is not just innovation. It is liberation through technology. Women, long marginalized in traditional politics, have emerged as leaders in this new Burkina Faso. Traore's cabinet includes more women than any in the country's history. They lead ministries of health, education, trade, and agriculture. Female-led cooperatives are managing grain storage and market access. In the city of Kédougou, a team of women engineers designed and constructed a solar farm that now powers 5,000 homes. In the Sahel region, a former refugee named Mariam now leads a reforestation campaign, planting over 1 million trees with a team of 800 women. She says, "We were displaced by war, but now we plant peace." This is what a revolution looks like, not in military uniforms, but in headscarves and work gloves. Yet with every success, the backlash grows fiercer. Economic sanctions loom. International banks downgrade credit ratings. Fake stories spread. Online, anonymous accounts accuse Traore of tyranny. Foreign media twist every policy into paranoia. They ask, where is democracy? But the Burkinab answer, democracy is not just voting every 5 years, it is food in our stomachs. It is education for our children. It is dignity for our elders. When foreign journalists complain about press restrictions, local communities ask why those same voices were silent during years of French military occupation, IMF austerity, and foreign corporate land grabs. The hypocrisy is not just visible, it is unbearable, and so the people fight back? Not with violence, but with voice. Graffiti appears on city walls. Traore is the people, young musicians sing. We are our own solution. Elders chant in marketplaces. Let them sanction. You Swiss, we have survived worse. Across borders, the flame spreads. In Mali, Niger, and Guinea, soldiers turned statesmen speak of sovereignty. In Chad and Cameroon, youth protest for change. In Congo, murals of Traore appear beside those of Lumumba. In South Africa, university debates erupt over what a second liberation should look like. It is not about worshipping one man. It is about waking up a continent. The African Union holds emergency meetings. Ikawa stammers between pressure and praise. Old leaders grow nervous. But the young, they are rising. A student in Kenya tweets, "We do not need visas to dream like Traore." A youth group in Nigeria declares, "Our revolution will be rooted like Burkina's." In Senegal, rallies end with chants of, "We are all Faso." Traore himself remains grounded. He avoids long foreign tours. He refuses to live in presidential mansions. His convoy has no sirens. His speeches remain direct, fiery, and clear. In A recent address to regional leaders, he said, "If standing for my people makes me an enemy to the world order, then so be it. I was not born to please empires, I was born to defend my land." The world watches, some in silence, some in awe, some in fear, but all must reckon with one fact: Burkina Faso is not returning to the past. It is forging something new. Something rooted, proud, and unbending, something dangerous to the old powers and liberating to the new generation. A model not built in Western universities, but in the hearts of African people who have tasted hunger, war, and betrayal, and decided never again in villages where water once came from dirty wells, in towns where girls once stayed home because schools had no toilets, in fields where the soil had forgotten the weight of seeds. That is where the revolution of Ibrahim Traoré planted its roots, not from above but from below, from the ground up. And that is where the real rebuilding of Burkina Faso began. In the province of Ganzourgou, the village of Zorgo was once a ghost town. Extremist attacks had driven families into hiding. The clinic had been burned down. The school turned into a storage house for weapons. Crops withered. Markets closed, but today Zorgo hums with new life. A new health center stands where rubble once lay, built by local masons. Supplied with medicine from a regional production hub launched under Traoré's Health for the People plan. Staffed by young nurses trained not in France but in new rural medical academies in Burkina Faso. Children line up under mango trees outside solar-powered classrooms. Their school books are printed in Ouagadougou. Their uniforms are sewn by local tailors, not imported from China. Their lunch millet porridge, fruit, and eggs comes from the school farm, worked by parents and volunteers. The village women operate a grinding mill powered by pedal energy. The youth are part of green brigades, replanting native trees and restoring soil. The imam and the priest jointly host evening literacy lessons, and the flag of Burkina Faso flies high. Not because it was hoisted, but because the people now believe in what it represents. Scenes like Zorgo are no longer isolated. Across the country, local development councils are replacing bloated central bureaucracies. Each community receives a sovereignty fund, a block grant managed by elders, youth representatives, and women's groups. No middlemen. No consultants. No contracts awarded to shell companies in Switzerland or Dubai, just citizens building what they need. A bridge in Sanga province was rebuilt using bricks made by the local technical school. A new grain silo in Banfora was designed by a 22-year-old civil engineer using indigenous architecture to protect against rot. In Gourma, a female-led co-op now exports dried mangoes to Mali and Niger without a single foreign middleman taking a cut. This is what self-reliance looks like in practice. It's messy, it's slow, but it's theirs. Of course, not all has gone smoothly. Corruption did not disappear overnight. Some local officials tried to pocket funds. A few attempted to reinstate the old patronage networks. When discovered, they were removed publicly. Trials were televised. The message was clear: this revolution is moral, not just political. Traoré did not shy from addressing failure. In one address, he said, "Yes, we will stumble. Yes, we will make mistakes. But we will stumble forward, not backward. Every brick that falls teaches us how to build stronger." He instituted citizen watchdog councils, ordinary villagers empowered to audit local projects. Complaints can now be filed via text message and are reviewed within 72 hours by regional justice committees. In the past, law was a weapon of the powerful. Now it is a shield for the poor. Justice itself has undergone a transformation. In Bobo Dioulasso, the notorious prison once known for torture has been converted into a vocational center. Inmates now learn carpentry, solar installation, and auto mechanics. Upon release, they are given small reintegration grants and guaranteed interviews at state-run firms. This isn't leniency, it's logic. It costs less to educate than to incarcerate, and it speaks to a larger theme in Traoré's philosophy. No Burkina is disposable. The justice system now integrates community mediation and traditional conflict resolution mechanisms. Village elders help resolve land disputes. Women's courts handle cases of domestic violence with both cultural sensitivity and zero tolerance. Law, once feared, is being reimagined as a communal responsibility. In the heart of this rebuilding lies a truth long buried, that Burkina Faso's greatest wealth is not its gold or cotton but its people. Traore often says, if a nation cannot feed itself, defend itself, and teach its children, it is not independent. It is occupied no matter what the flag says. That's why, under his leadership, 3 pillars were declared sacred: food, security, knowledge. Food. Burkina Faso's journey toward food sovereignty has not been easy. Years of dependence on imported rice, wheat, and powdered milk had drained national pride. Foreign food aid created a cycle of dependency. Traore broke it. He subsidized local seeds, banned the import of expired foreign food, and launched a massive national food reserve program. Dams were constructed, rainwater catchments built. The Ministry of Agriculture was rebranded as the Ministry of Soil and Spirit today. Burkina Faso grows 80% of its staple food needs. By 2027, the goal is full independence. Security strategy was radical. We will not defeat terror with terror. We will defeat it with trust. Instead of chasing shadows, he empowered communities. Volunteer defense forces were trained not just in arms, but in law and human rights. Troops were embedded in villages, not garrisons. Intelligence was gathered through relationships, not drones. Former fighters were offered amnesty in exchange for public service. This strategy worked. In 2 years, attacks dropped by 70%. Over 600 villages have been declared fully recovered zones. Knowledge education has become the beating heart of the new Burkina Faso. Enrollment is now mandatory and free up to age 18. School meals are guaranteed. School infrastructure is built by local cooperatives. And the curriculum has changed. No longer do students memorize European rivers before they learn about the Niger. History classes teach Thomas Sankara alongside Plato. Girls are required to learn computer skills. Boys must study gender equality and anti-violence training, and the results are beginning to show. Literacy has jumped 20%. School dropouts have declined. A new generation is rising, not just informed but inspired. Burkina Faso today is not perfect. It still struggles with limited resources, harsh climate, and external threats. But perfection was never the goal. The goal was freedom, the real kind. Built on dignity, not dependency. Across dusty roads, concrete pillars rise for new railways that will connect the country with Mali and Niger. Trains powered by Burkina-built engines, designed to carry not just goods but solidarity. In the markets, women sell products stamped "Made in Faso," not with shame. With pride, a new Burkina passport is in development, with biometric security and a symbol embossed on the cover. The rising sun over a hammer and hoe. And at night, when the power stays on, children listen to their parents tell stories of how it all began with a soldier who refused to kneel.